What about the NFL changes, Heath? I know that the NFL obviously are trying to make some improvements because this is not a good look when all these players, and they have a lot of them, are suffering from CTE.
Yeah, I mean they've started moving like they originally, right? They moved the yard line, so most kicks are into the end zone and things like that. Where
so getting rid of like kickoff
to,
returns, and punt returns.
Yeah, things where it's just like full speed contact, where and that's not even. I don't even know if that's CTE mitigation because that's the long term effect of it, but it's more of like again that permanent injury, the permanent concussion that could come out of that, the permanent damage that comes out of, helmet to helmet contact at both people flying at high speeds. Because we used to, that was part of the game that we loved, right? Big old punt return guy gets up or a kick return gets up to full speed and gets the layout, right? There's literally media companies have been built out of highlight reels of players getting laid out on these types of things. And we glorify that and we celebrate it because it was originally part of the game. Now we've all learned more about and continue to learn more about as more and more technology becomes available and we can educate ourselves on these types of things. But yeah, I start to think about how can the game be different, right? Are there lines you could put into the game where you're talking about sort of in hockey, you have sort of the 3-line offside rules, things like that are preventing a lot of those sort of long-term things. Because Jimmy, you talk about it. Your biggest ones came in the box, right? Because there's a natural aggression to be able to attack the ball. Well, if you want to stop somebody from attacking that, you've got to grapple with them and you've got to be aggressive to clear the ball. And you're talking about a condensed area where there's only so much room for bodies and heads and things to go flying in, including a goalkeeper who has a little bit more of a free rein to take your head off by accident, right? And be aggressive by accident. They're protected in a different way, and rightfully so. But I just think about how the game can become different where you're starting to prevent those types of scenarios. So maybe it's situational where, I don't know how you remove set pieces from the game at all, but how can you start to prevent these types of scenarios where it's the classic throw it in the mixer, the name of Jimmy's original show, throw it into the mixer because you don't know it's chaos, right? That was the whole thing. We had the Bash Brothers with the San Jose Earthquakes that were all about just putting their head where you wouldn't put your foot in order to create goal scoring opportunities. That havoc is where it starts to get dangerous. So I'm wondering if we can analyze those most dangerous moments or most vulnerable moments for players and then build mechanisms around that. Now, that ends up probably changing the whole dynamic of the way the game is played and probably doesn't happen because of that. But I'm wondering, are there situational things where it's no longer, there's a certain different line, an offside line or free kicks from certain areas that change the game to where it becomes a little bit more of with your feet than in the air. I mean, it's hard for us to imagine that now, right? Because of the way we've always played it. But I think there is an evolution of every sport over time that needs to be taken into account. Sort of there's always going to be risk, but can we mitigate some of those risks or minimize?
Minimize it for sure. Now, last year there was some research done with around 8,000 former professional players from Scotland, and they found the risk of goalkeepers developing a neurodegenerative disease was similar to the general population level. So goalkeepers, you're all set and you get to get free punches on people. Now, everybody else out on the field were almost 4 times as likely as an ordinary member of the public, with defenders developing dementia in later life roughly 5 times more, which doesn't bode well for me in particular. Hollywood Heath, you wanted to keep that face clean. Doesn't seem like you did.
I never played defense either.
The findings, that's true. The findings were the same, though, for players, regardless of the era in which they competed. So despite changes in technology and head injury management, the study included data on players who played in the 1930s all the way through to the 90s. We could argue, Chuck, that it's developed even further in terms of that. But I don't think, and we know a friend of ours, Taylor Twin, who also had some significant head injuries and has a great initiative with concussion protocol. Excuse me. He is trying to advocate for, and I don't know why this hasn't been done sooner, especially remember when we had 3 subs and then we went to 5 because of the pandemic and everybody was like, this is going to ruin the game. This is the worst thing ever. And now 5 subs is being adopted because it feels really smart and really the right thing to do. Do you think there should be a concussion sub allowed so that there is an injury? Because it's so hard for, and I've already talked about it and gave an example of doctors on the side to be able to evaluate players quickly to know. Now, I know there's some technology coming in where you can do something with the eyesight. You can see where they are very quickly in terms of how their brain is reacting to different things. It's almost on the outside looking in, which would be really cool. And I wish I had that when we were playing. But do you think a concussion sub is something the game should have, and I don't understand why people are pushing back on it, because it seems like it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it does make a lot of sense. I mean, you want to have this sport continue to progress and be the main sport in America. And that's what we've all pushed for, because we've got to travel the world and we've got to experience how this is one of those sports that builds bridges and I think allows you to experience new cultures, and it's a game that is so inviting and inclusive. So I think the only way that you can continue to make this sport safe and inclusive is by adopting the concussion rule, because we want people to be healthy. We want people who have played the game that when they're in their 60s and 70s and 80s, they can still walk around. They can still, they still can live a long, healthy life and be advocates of the sport. So I'm always for the concussion substitution rule.
Okay, and by the way,
good.
Jimmy, on that, MLS Next Pro just launched some new rules themselves. One of which is the off-field treatment rule, meaning if you have medical treatment come onto the field, you're forced to stay off the field a minimum of 3 minutes. And so obviously there's two things to that. One, there's the gamesmanship, right? The sportsmanship that we know happens when you're trying to run out a game. But there is actually ample time now for a medical staff to be able to potentially examine, as opposed to like look left, look right, how do you feel, take you off for 30 seconds. You're now forced to stay off for 3 minutes of match time if medical treatment comes on. Now, I don't know what the effects of that, if that means people are not willing to go down even more now because they know that they'll have to come off. I know there's a reason for that, but ultimately it does give somebody who has their quote unquote bell rung or gets any sort of head injury, because we know that it's an instant stoppage of play now. If the ref perceives it as a head injury or a head contact or collision of some kind, the ref stop it immediately, as opposed to playing advantages and other things. He's meant to blow his whistle. But now being forced off the field for 3 minutes, do you think, Jimmy, in your experience, that that's something worthwhile or valuable? Because it is going to be baby steps. You can't just go in and say, "Hey, we're getting rid of set pieces. There's no more heading the ball in the game." But there are small steps that you can take towards learning more and mitigating even the risks of what currently takes place, right? Which is players going on the field in an unsafe environment after getting a concussion or what's perceived as a non-concussion.
It feels like this is more of a delicate topic than it should be. I mean, given all the research that's coming out, and on the girls' side as well, there's been reports in a journal, Pediatrics, back a couple of years ago, mentioning that girls actually get concussions twice as much as boys do in high school. But
that's not all from headers.
No, it's not. It's not.
Because then you could really just go, oh, well, what about 50-50 challenges? Are we going to take that out of the game? Because
right.
You could go down the list of how players are getting concussions. Boots to the head.
Yeah. Right. Especially at that age, where I think you're still trying to figure out how to use your body.
Right.
There's a lot of uncontrollable or players that just run but don't know necessarily how to run or how to protect themselves. And so yeah, that's a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because
high school soccer was harder to play than any level that I ever played at, because
I agree.
I bet Charlie knows the moves don't work. You can do a step over, that person's not moving. They're going to still stand right there. They don't bite on that because they didn't even see it, Charlie. They didn't even see it.
Yeah.
They didn't even see it. Like, yeah, the gap in levels is quite big in high school, and figuring out a way. I think it's still an important thing, just to sidebar, for our best players to play high school, because they learn leadership qualities in terms of, how do I get the most out of this player when he can only do A and B and not, A through Z. So that was just, I think it's kind of a disappointing that we don't have our top players learning how to develop those types of skill sets.
Jimmy wants to mandate all players play high school soccer. Jimmy wants to mandate that all youth national team players play high school soccer.
The moves.
I think there's value in it. That's all I'm saying.
Those not doing anything for defenders. Like, I can't tell you how many step overs I did where the player just stood there. And that's in college too. I mean, my college practices at BC might have been some of the most difficult practices, because these defenders would not move at any time I did a move. And I would get so frustrated. I'm like, you can't defend. You're just standing there. but it worked. So yeah, I can completely vibe with you on that, Heath.
I might have played more World Cups if I just learned how to stand there when Charlie was doing it. So with regard to your point, Heath, I don't know. In your question, I don't know what the right answer is to mitigate this, but I do think that there might be these little rules, as you mentioned, 3 minutes or these little things that we can do to just think about it. I think as long as there's a conversation, everybody understands the risk and understands how these things happen. It's going to be really, for me on set pieces, it's going to be impossible to Charlie's point. Like, how do you get that out of the game? It's such a huge part of how teams have success. I mean, World Cups have been won or lost on set pieces, and that's not going to change. We talk about Zidane. You know, obviously the guy is one of the best players of all time with his feet, but he scored 2 headers in a World Cup final against Brazil. I mean, you know, I don't know. It's just a different.
Well, you might not be able to get rid of. Yeah, you might not be able to get rid of set pieces and things like that. That would lead to like sort of high impact situations. But there probably are steps along the way that you could mitigate some of the sustained, like the leveling of the playing field, which is the 3 of us outside of Jimmy's obvious concussions have probably, and I'm sure Jimmy more than us as a central defender, where 40 times in a game, someone hits a long goal kick and you've got to go up, and part of your job in which you are judged is to win that first ball, right? Is to win the win the ball for your team. And therefore you're scrapping for it, which increases the odds of 1 head to head, but 2, that
elbow
type
to
of
face.
That type of impact. But there's got to be some sort of things along the way that you can start to eliminate or alter that can at least decrease risk.
So